Welcome to Stay in the Fight, a podcast by and for American veterans. I'm your host, David, and the intent for these episodes is to talk to veterans from all walks and to share their stories without a script or agenda. I'll be talking to men and women across all branches and jobs, from the Korean War era through the Global War on Terror era. We'll cover the good, the bad, and the ugly of war, service, and transition, with a focus on what it takes to stay in the fight. Hello, and welcome to the Stay in the Fight podcast, where we talk with American veterans and service members and share their stories. I'm your host, David. Today we're joined by Tab, a former Marines Public Affairs NCO. Tab, thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Would you mind introducing yourself, kind of giving us your background?
Yep. So I am Tab Bartley. I served 8 years in the Marine Corps. I'm from Lafayette, Indiana, which most people have zero idea where that is, but Purdue University are in between Chicago and Indianapolis. I ended up transitioning out of the Marine Corps after 8 years. I was injured, worked at Purdue University on the fundraising side of the house, ran for Indiana State Senate, and now I work for the Department of Agriculture doing public affairs, which is what I did in my Marine Corps. And I also host a podcast, the Oath We Took podcast, telling the stories of the Marine Corps through the Marines that served. And I do a number of different veteran advocacy through organizations like Minority Vets of America, to just different advocacy and talking and sharing my story.
All right. That's a lot to unpack. So, yes, let me start with, how did you end up in the Marines?
So I actually had zero aspirations to join the Marine Corps. I was what was called a 21st Century Scholarship recipient. So in the state of Indiana, I was able to attend any public university for free. And I was in my first year of community college studying social work, and not really sure exactly what I wanted to do when one day a Marine Corps recruiter called me, asked if I wanted to come in the office. He must have just caught me on a good day. It was like, sure, I guess I'll come in, but like, there's no way I'm going to join the Marine Corps. However, he was a massive New York Yankees fan. I was too. And we spent probably the first 30 minutes of our meeting talking like the Bernie Williams, Derek Jeter era, like the best New York Yankees baseball era, I will say. And yeah, and he started then talking about public affairs, which at that time was called combat correspondence, and what that job did, which is, photography, journalism, public speaking, community relations, media relations. And I was like, I had no idea that was in the Marine Corps. But yeah, I'm still not gonna join. Like, that's crazy. Like, I want to like do good in the world, and I just didn't understand it. And then so to this day, I have no idea if this story is true, and it doesn't matter. But so my recruiter then tells this story about how he was on a humanitarian mission, and there were multiple branches of service who were there. And the whole goal of this mission was to get provisions to civilians without shots being fired. And the Air Force had tried and shots were fired at them, and the Army had tried and shots were fired at them. And then so they called his random unit of Marines up, and he kind of paused there in the story, and he was like, because of the uniform that we wore and what they meant, and they knew what that uniform meant, they didn't fire shots at us. And we were able to get these provisions to these civilians peacefully because of the legacy and the symbolism of what our uniform means. And that was the moment that I was like, wow, okay, yeah, I want to be a Marine.
That was the hook, huh?
That was the hook. It was just like, and it was, that during that time of like in high school, we had just really been learning about like genocides, and Darfur was happening. All of these things were happening. And as corny as it is, like, Mr. Feeney, like, do good in the world, like, don't do well in the world, but do good. I guess that was kind of like how I wanted to live my life. Like, I wanted to do some good, and like living the life I lived, I knew that you kind of, in the times where you saw the worst of people, you also saw the best of them. And so the more that my recruiter shared his story, the things he had done in the Marine Corps, the things he had seen, I saw the Marine Corps as my opportunity to do some good, and to also, be in some raw, real situations and that type of thing. So I ended up waiting 6 months to enlist in the delayed entry program, and then was in the delayed entry program for 11 months so that I could get public affairs. I was dead set on that job. Like, once he told me about that job, it was like no other job was going to do it.
So when did you actually hit boot camp?
So I went to boot camp in September of 2011 or 2010, 2010.
Okay. So we still got Afghanistan going on. Uh, Iraq is mostly over by then. Where'd you go your first trip?
Quantico, Marine Corps base Quantico, as like one of maybe two non-demoted PFCs at that base. I will say it was probably the best place to start my career at that time. Quantico was only one of a few installations that still had a base newspaper. So we were busting out 10 to 12 stories a week, which was, way higher rate than the rest of our peers out in the field. We were, getting to experience so many different units from, we had weapons training battalion there to my beat was security battalion. So I was covering our police officers and firefighters on base, to meeting the commandant multiple times, Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps multiple times. Bonnie Amos knew me by name, and it was probably one of the most awkward things ever. But it was a great place, I think, to start my career, and more so like the leadership I had at Quantico was phenomenal. I will forever, you know how like people look back on their like high school days and they like reminisce about that. For me, it was my first duty station at Quantico of like being a PFC Lance Corporal, just running around the base, getting to cover stories and do that type of stuff.
Probably a unique experience. I think most people hate their first duty station.
For sure, which was funny enough, one of the advices that my recruiter gave me or he asked of me was to never judge the Marine Corps by my first duty station. He was just like, give it another station, good or bad. Like, don't judge the whole entire Marine Corps on whatever your first duty station is, because that's just your first little piece of it. And he was also wise enough to know that it was so determined on who your leadership was and who was around you.
Yeah, has more to do with the people you're surrounded by than the location, right?
Yeah.
So you do. How long did you do that at Quantico?
I was at Quantico, I want to say for 3.5 years
Enough to
ish.
convince you to sign again?
For sure. Yeah. I didn't feel like I did enough. I joined the Marine Corps with an MOS that you're expected to deploy and you want to deploy and you want to kind of like, again, be in those situations and you want to document history and you want to tell the stories of Marines. The Marine Corps is the first branch of service to, they're the reason why there are combat correspondents. Back in World War II, there was this philanthropist who wanted recordings of the Indigenous Islanders, and goes to all the branches of service. He's like, I'll give you all this free equipment, all this free stuff, just get me some recordings. And every other branch is like, nah, no, thank you. And the Marine Corps is like, free shit. We will take that.
Yeah.
And the Marine Corps ended up, we're the only branch of service that has recordings from World War II. And it's the coolest thing. You can actually hear it in the Library of Congress, but you hear, um, it sounds like a baseball game. It sounds like they're talking about a baseball game, that same like narration, but they're
Mhm.
talking about the battle and you hear bombs dropping and they're like doing hometown interviews. And so that history and legacy, I didn't feel like I got to embody that at Quantico because we're covering high school sports. We're covering hurricane. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
covering some cool training. Like, don't get me wrong. And there were some really cool human interest pieces that I was able to cover and, get some really cool stories of Marines, but it wasn't it wasn't why you sign up for that MOS and that job,
Sure.
right? Like you expect to be kind of out there in the worst of situations, being able to document that and tell people stories. And so I wanted that opportunity. And so I enlisted again, um, and went on what is not considered our B billet at the time, but it was marketing and public affairs. So recruiting duty, but I wasn't a recruiter. I handled all of the marketing and public affairs for recruiting station Columbia, South Carolina. So I managed piece of like all of South Carolina minus the Beaufort area, and then into the Charlotte, Asheville area, and a piece of the Augusta, Georgia. And so I was the Marine that was handling all of the commercials, marketing, public affairs for that entire area, which is what I wanted to do at that time. And it's while my husband, he was deployed to Djibouti, Africa. So the goal was to do recruiting duty and then to get stationed in Japan to, continue my career because that's kind of like the trajectory of a Marine, at some point, you're going to have to be in Japan. And I just wanted to do recruiting duty first because independent duty, I think, creates such a baseline you don't get other places, and you get put in so many situations that you just become a better leader.
What does independent duty mean?
I was the only person who did my job in that command of 100. So I directly reported to the commanding officer as a corporal. I was the only corporal in the recruiting station at that time, and one of two corporals, I think, in the entire district. There was only 48 Marines in the nation who do that job at a time. So it was really something that was kind of hard to get, and I had to fight for because I was technically a single parent because I was not married, and my now husband, but at the time just my fiance, was deploying to Africa. So it was one of those things you really had to fight to get.
Yeah. So I guess that you get to be an adult if you can act like an adult.
Yeah, but at the same time, you also don't like have the resources of like a base and an installation. Now, we were lucky that Fort Jackson was there, but that was the Army installation, and obviously they had no priority to support us in any way.
Just like a
They
best citizen.
Yeah, they were just there. So yeah, it was definitely an experience, but I think it made the command, at least my command, had really good leadership. So again, I was blessed that my entire time in the Marine Corps up until the end, I had great leadership.
After this recruiting gig, did you get to go to Japan?
So sadly, I didn't. I actually ended up, so I had three children when I was in the Marine Corps, and my last child, 6 weeks postpartum, the Rucking Raiders, which is an organization that, brings awareness to the Marine Raiders who have passed, was doing a hike all throughout. I don't remember where all the route was going, but essentially they were going through our area of operation to do 8 miles. And so 6 weeks postpartum, I get a call that they're coming through and our poolies and our recruiters are going to do an 8 mile portion of the hike with them, and asking if I could cover and take photos. So 6 weeks after having a baby, I put on my pack, camera gear, and I go out and hike, take photos. The next day, I ended up in the emergency room with my uterus, bladder, and rectum falling out of my body. I didn't know that that was something that could even happen to you. And at that time, I think we had orders, or I had just gotten my orders. I don't remember exactly. But as you know, TRICARE doesn't work fast, and women's health is considered specialty care. So I couldn't just go to the doctor and get seen. I no longer was allowed to go to gynecologists because that's considered specialty care. So I had to go to my PCM, who knew nothing, to get them to referral to my OBGYN, who then was like, I can't fix you. This is not what I do. This is serious stuff. I don't have a fix that can put you back in the Marine Corps. To then wait, I think it was 4 or 5 months before I could see a specialist, for them to say, well, you have these, other issues, and I can't fix this until you get this under wraps. And at that time, I am a few days away from my end of service. And so put in a medical hold, expecting to be held medically, right? Because I wanted to stay in the Marine Corps, and either way I was, broken, and it was, their obligation to fix me or make sure that I was, able to function. And for those who don't know, so multiple organ prolapses, like for me, the symptoms were I couldn't stand for more than a few minutes without severe pain. I didn't have full control of bodily functions. It started triggering complex migraines, which imitate strokes, and was causing a slew of all these other issues. And so 4 days before my end of service, I'm up for, the determination of whether I can even go up and be held medically and be put on a medical board, or whatever the path is going to be. And the provider who saw me didn't look at any of my stuff, didn't make any, didn't examine me, didn't do anything. This was just a naval doctor who has no experience with women's health or anything like that, and determined that because it wasn't life or death, I didn't qualify to be medically held. I didn't qualify to go on a med board. Plenty of women live with it. The VA could just fix me. And for anybody who's listening, Yeah, that's not how the VA works. You don't just get to go directly into VA healthcare or to be seen. And so 4 days before my EAS, I had to figure out how to move my family, where we were going to live, all of these things. And I I didn't know what to do. So the only thing I could think to do was put a congressional inquiry in to try to get, to try to get this to pause, or at the very least to get um, people to look at this so this wouldn't happen to other females in the Marine Corps and in the service. And my elected official essentially said like that wasn't his job because he wasn't on the Veterans Committee. Which again is not how things work, not how it is. And so yeah, we ended up having to just kind of figure it out in a 4 day period. And so I was stationed in South Carolina. My home was Indiana. And by the way, my husband at that time, he had gotten out of the Navy because my career in the Marine Corps was progressing so much faster. At that time, being dual military, especially of different branches, was we knew we were not going to be stationed together again. Yeah. And so we made the determination that he would get out. He would kind of play more the stay-at-home parent role, though he wasn't like a full-time stay-at-home parent. That, he was the stable parent, the parent that was able to make the sacrifices, because obviously, like, if you're in the military, you can't make those sacrifices. And so this all kind of happened in a slew of, I guess it was months of fighting this, and I'm still at the same time dealing with all these physical ramifications. And so when I talk about my transition, I always say that like I wouldn't wish my transition on my worst enemy. It was the most mentally, physically, and emotionally challenging time of my life. I had birthed 3 children naturally, and half the time I wasn't able to stand up without being in severe pain. I wasn't able to, help my husband around the house or play with my kids or do all of these things that as like a parent and a spouse, I felt like I should be doing. And so it was extremely, extremely rough on not just me, but like my family as well.
So you you'd kind of been shown the door by this doctor, right? To get out. How do you get the help you need?
And that's the other battle of it. And so the only solution I could find in my mind was to move back home. My grandmother was kind enough to let us stay with her because obviously I didn't have a job because I couldn't tell people when I was getting out of the Marine Corps. I
Yeah.
had done multiple interviews, had multiple job offers, but couldn't give them a date of like when I was getting out. So moved back home. My husband, started working side jobs and doing things, and I was searching for a job. And you would think being public affairs, which is a job with a ton of skill sets. I was really good at my job in the Marine
You're a
Corps.
people
Like,
person.
yeah, I was very good at my job. I had done a lot of things in the Marine Corps that were first for the Marine Corps in my MS or recruiting or that type of thing, and I had gained a lot of respect from the work I had put in at the RS. And it was a lot harder than I thought just because I didn't have a degree, even though I had 8 years of experience, had done all of these things. And I was lucky enough to get a interview at Purdue University on the fundraising side of the house. So their foundation who, does the fundraising as an administrative assistant at the College of Pharmacy. And that was, I want to say, the starting point of like kind of getting through the transition, but while going through that, I'm still not like I'm disabled without having any protection of being disabled because the disability process with the VA is such a long process. And in Indiana, there's only one VA, and it was over an hour and a half away from me, or there's another in Danville, in Illinois, which is another hour and a half away. And so fighting to get the disability was one thing, but then it was a whole nother thing to get treatment, especially in rural America. Rural veterans are like, we don't have the same access to healthcare, to a lot of things. And especially as a woman, that is like essentially non-existent. They were wanting me to travel to Indianapolis twice a week for pelvic floor physical therapy. And I was like, well, then I won't have a job and I can't afford to not have a job. And so it was a struggle. I had to fight for months to the point of I don't like to say that I was suicidal, but in my transition, I understood how a veteran could come to the conclusion of suicide. I I felt like a burden to everybody around me. I felt like I constantly had to fight to get the most basic care. Um, and I couldn't talk about it. I felt like because it was like these women issues, and anytime I tried to talk about it, it made other people uncomfortable. And for me, I think that was such a challenge because, like, in the Marine Corps, I completely found my authentic self. I was known as Blunt Bartley. I really never didn't say anything I didn't want to say. I just utilized tact to be able to say what I wanted to say, so that nothing nothing could happen to me or whatever. And so all of a sudden to feel like I had to be so silent about what I was going through, I think that was almost, I don't want to say the bigger part of the struggle, but like part of it, right? Like all of a sudden I can't talk about anything. And I'm, as I'm really struggling mentally, it got to the point where my husband attended a doctor's appointment with me, and I had an amazing PCM through the VA. And she's asking, like, okay, what do we need to work on next? What do we need to do next? And I kind of just stay silent. And my husband's like, we want to look into mental health. Um, she's struggling with this, struggling with that. And she doesn't feel like what she went through is worth it, but like she needs the help. And I will forever be grateful for my husband to that, because I didn't feel like my stuff was bad enough, right? Like what I was going through and all of that. And she was just like, okay, yeah, no problem. Like it was no big deal. It was just like, yeah, we have a counselor here on staff. Do you want to see a counselor? Do you want to see a psychiatrist? Like, what do you want to do? Um, and so I started going to counseling, and it was making such a huge impact where mentally, I was starting to finally be more productive and be able to be there. Um, I wasn't having as many panic attacks. I wasn't having to avoid as many things as I had previously been avoiding, things like simple things like I couldn't ride in an elevator. I couldn't, like, there were all these things that I just like could not do. And when I started getting a little better and realized like I have this massive support system, right? Like I had a massive support system. I was not alone in any capacity, and I could get that low. I was just like, what are other veterans going through who don't have that? And I started an organization for women veterans, specifically because obviously like so much of my issues were based on my gender. And I had never experienced that in the Marine Corps. Like my gender was a positive in the Marine Corps. It was like, hey, come to this school so they know female Marines exist. Hey, go to this school so that these young women know that they can have families and they can have babies and they can do these things in the military. And so for my gender to be such a negative all of a sudden, and specifically to civilians, right? Like I wasn't having issues in the veteran community. It was like with all these civilians. Um, so started an organization for women veterans and started talking about my issues. And what do you know? Multiple Marines of multiple generations, all having pelvic floor issues, all having multiple organ prolapses. And it's like, this isn't a trend. I'm in Lafayette, Indiana. 5 of the 10 female service members have experienced this. Like, this is an issue that we're not talking about that could be avoided, right? Like, it's
Yeah. Oh, I was about to ask you, was your was your condition like unique to you? Or once you started this organization, are you exposed to like, oh, we're all kind of dealing with similar problems. And more importantly, we're dealing with similar resistance in the in the medical community in terms of helping us.
Yeah, so it's a multitude of things. So, when I was in the Marine Corps, I was also a sexual assault victim advocate. And one of the things that was really weird to me that I remember talking about is when men and women go through basic training or something and say that they may have a previous sexual assault counter or something that is so traumatizing to them that they can't make it through boot camp. Oftentimes they will label it, or they will have like digestive or pelvic floor issues. And there is this, and I'm not a medical person, this is just me doing a ton of research of my own healing path. There is a connection between trauma being stored in our pelvic floor. So if you look at the military and you look at women for pelvic floor issues and you look at men for hernia issues, right? You probably know a lot of men in the military who've dealt with hernia issues, way more than the civilian population. It's a multitude of we're not doing the physical things we need to prepare our body for this, and we're not doing enough physical when it comes to like pelvic floor strength, pelvic floor, that. But for women, it's also like postpartum care. We are not doing even sort of what we should be doing when it comes to postpartum care in the military, and making sure that when our service members return back to duty, that they're returning back to where they can be, their bodies can be taken care of, right? It shouldn't be that you just return and you don't know these things. If we're going to put in all this money and all of these resources, that should be something that we address, right? Like our postpartum care for service members is just, it's not there. There's not a knowledge. And there are some programs that have been started or tried, but like at this point, I still haven't heard much about it. But essentially, I could have avoided that injury or avoided that severity if I, one, knew that it was even a possibility that it happened. Two, knew what I needed to do for my pelvic floor, things I could have done for my pelvic floor. And again, there are specialists out there, but there's not as many pelvic floor specialists as other people. It is getting a lot more conversation, not just in the military, but in the civilian world, because this is kind of a trend that we see in the civilian population where women's health isn't something that's studied. Women's health isn't something that is a priority or something that a lot of medical knowledge is based off of. Most medical knowledge is based off of research done on men. I mean, our bodies are different. We go through different things. And so I think there is more of a conversation around it now. It's not something that I feel is, it's common, yes, but that doesn't mean that like, it's like the lady said, well, it's not life or death, so you're fine. Well, no, right? Just because something's common doesn't mean that it is okay or is the norm for what our bodies do. And so I think that's the conversation around it, is that yes, something is common, but it shouldn't be normal, and it's not our normal what our bodies do.
So in your own research and in your organization, have you found that like there's probably preventative measures or tailored physical training, physical therapy approaches that could basically return a female Marine to full, I don't know what you call it, full fitness status postpartum?
So for prolapse specifically, they come in 3 stages, and depending on your severity of prolapse, like mine was so severe, the only complete fix would be surgery, and that still wouldn't fix it. So it does come to a point of like where surgery is the only option, but I had had so many previous surgeries from hip issues and all these other things that I didn't want a surgery. And when we're looking at postpartum, pelvic floor health and pelvic floor physical therapy is something that like it should be done. You do find a lot more, even just like, what is the term? Personal trainers who know more about pelvic floor health. Again, because it's not just, women aren't the only ones who have pelvic floors. Like this isn't like something unique to them. Prolapse issues are more commonly a female issue. But yes, it's looking at that pelvic floor health and doing pelvic floor physical therapy. And yes, our bodies are unique, but there's a lot of things that we could be doing to strengthen that and should be doing, as well as allowing the body time to recover properly. And part of that issue is we have OBGYNs who are straight civilians and have no idea what it means to be in the military, specifically the Marine Corps, and saying, yeah, you're clear to return to full duty at 6 weeks.
Yeah, throw that rock on.
Yeah, but they have no grasp of what that means, right? And so that is part of the divide and issue. I think the most successful thing I have seen is women mentoring other women and or male Marines who have had spouses go through something like that and understand that. I think right now that is the fastest solution to it. I don't think just like starting a program is the most successful, because if leadership doesn't back it, right, then it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Yeah, it just doesn't. But I think the more, and this shouldn't just fall on women Marines by any means, but the more that like senior leadership and leadership is aware of it, then the more that they can, better prepare their Marines and service members when they're in that postpartum transition.
So you're struggling with the VA, you're getting your care, you're getting some mental health care as well. How did you transition to, did you say running for Senate or something?
Oh, this is so this is funny. One, I have not politics. Like, again, my name in the Marine Corps was Blunt Bartley. And as I'm still working for Purdue University and starting to do some like local advocacy on things that I was seeing issues and just trying to bridge the gap between the civilians and the veterans in the community. I met another female who had run for, I think, Congress or something else. And she had interviewed me on her podcast and we were talking about things. And the next day she called and she was like, you ever thought about running for state Senate? I was like, no. Do you forget our whole conversation and like the like personality? I was like, no, no, I've not. Politics is not my thing. Like I just, nope. I have no loyalty to a party. Like, nope, not it. She's like, yeah, I get that. District 6, though, which covers, I lived in more of the even more rural than my hometown, but part of my hometown was in this district, and then some other, it was like 7 counties that I all, they were my hometown where I was from and where I currently live. And she's like, yeah, there's no one running. And I was like, what? Like, yeah, there's no one running for this party. I think it's something you should consider. And so I get off the phone and I was like, this is crazy. And I'm a person that like, I don't believe things just happen. Like, my belief is like, it's just like, okay, God is talking to me. He's telling me to do something. Like, what the heck? This is like too random, too like just out there. And so I go home and have a conversation with my husband. He's like, what do you think about this? And he was like, well, I don't, if you want to, great, I'll support you. And I called my job because in Indiana, being in politics is not a full-time job, or at least it wouldn't be for somebody like me. For other people it is, but for me, it wouldn't be my full-time job. And I was like, can I do this and still keep my job? Like, that's obviously the first concern. And they were like, yeah, you just can't use any of our equipment or, that type of stuff. It's like, well, yeah, yep, self-explanatory, but thank you for that. And so I traveled to Indianapolis, so like a 2-hour drive the next day, had to be there before noon, and my name on the ballot as a candidate for Indiana State Senate. And this was, yeah, and so the more that I had looked into it and talked about it, it was like so many of the issues that Indiana was facing, and specifically those counties, were things that I had intimate connection with, from our education system to infant and maternal mortality rate to veterans. Indiana is a state where they tote that they support veterans, but when you look at the legislation and the things that passed, it doesn't equal what they say. Indiana is also one of the states that only has a few hospitals that you can deliver babies at. So in the 7 counties that I covered, there was only one hospital you could deliver babies. So like I had to travel 45 minutes to deliver my last child. And so there were all these things that I had intimate experience with, like pretty easy solutions. Like we need to have a state doula, so you can find doulas. We need more midwife. We need more of these like birthing centers and these type of things. Because the infant and maternal mortality rate in Indiana is 7th and 3rd in the nation. Like it is atrocious. And obviously that was something that the traumatic birth I had, and that I had intimate knowledge of these type of things. And so I also didn't have a loyalty to a party. And I think that was something that we really, really needed. Indiana is extremely gerrymandered and has a supermajority, and I don't believe in a supermajority of any thought. If you want things to change, then you need people of like diverse thought and ideas, right? And I also didn't care about who I worked with or didn't work with, as long as the problems could get solved, right? Like no ego, no those type of things. And so the more that I thought of it from that angle, it was like, yeah, I could do this. I could run a campaign. I wanted to run the campaign completely different than I had seen other campaigns ran. And then COVID hit. So running an election 2020. So a lot of my strategies went out the window. And the challenge of running an election virtually in a community that doesn't even have broadband service was an extreme challenge. But we did what we came to do, which, I had people who had never voted before and they went to register so that they could vote for me. I had people who had never voted for that party before who voted for me. It was really a campaign that was like about what the issues were. I was not like supported by the party. I was not supported by like those type of things.
Sure.
And that was my goal though. It was that you want to know who your actual person is who's going to represent you or what the issues are that they're going to face. And I felt like that was very important for the campaign to be very transparent in everything and who I was, as well as what type of leader I would be. And it's not really the norm to go straight to like your state Senate race and not have paid your due diligence in other
You're not an
spots.
insider.
But that's not what I was good at, right? Like I'm not good at like the numbers and these type of things that you're dealing at with the county level or the drama of a lot of those more local type stuff. That just wasn't my jam, wasn't my leadership style. And so it was a great learning experience. I can't say that I'll ever run again.
Yeah.
Not, again, it was never like a goal to begin with. It was just I could do this and I could do this well. So yeah, I ran.
Because what does that look like once you're behind that curtain, right? And you kind of look behind, and is it as intimidating as one might imagine if you've never been in that arena?
Yes and no. I think that a lot of the intimidation is not understanding like the laws and legalities behind it, because there is a lot. And that's where if you do run as a party, you have more support in regards to like those type of things. I was able to attend sessions with other people who were running, and they were explain, the county or the state or what like had to be done financially. Because it was state level, I didn't have to do as much fundraising. And I also, part of my campaign strategy or how I wanted to run the campaign was that like I wanted to get kneecap to kneecap with as many people as I wanted, as I could. I wanted people to know kind of me as a person and what I stood behind and would stand behind, not a scripted like PR type,
Yeah.
like I'm only going to say these things or I'm going to ride the coattail of what my party believes. When I don't believe in a loyalty to a party, so I couldn't be that way. That went against my whole campaign of like not like I don't just have blind loyalty to anybody. Like that's wild to me. And uh I will say we were very successful in regards to, they're doing these calls. The other party is doing these calls and they're asking, like, how do you feel about your elected official? And they're like, who? Don't even know his name. And then they would say, well, whose name do you know? And then more people brought up my name, which then of course caused a lot of money to be dropped in their campaign. But we had strategic marketing. I was not going to spend money just to spend money so that our campaign had more money. And I know that like it's like whoever raises the most money wins the campaign. Sure, great. I think that if COVID hadn't hit and I was able to do the in-person events that we had planned, I don't think we would have had I think we would have had a even higher chance of winning, although we had good, I think we had historically high for that party in those areas in the last like 10 years. So it was still like, again, it was a good campaign, a lot of learning experience. But I used so much of what I learned in the Marine Corps and doing marketing in the Marine Corps for this, that it was almost more like I was using my tools from the Marine Corps to run in the campaign than so much like learning campaigns, because I got so much advice that was, I thought, horrible advice when it came to marketing and came to things. And just because campaigns like texting, oh my goodness, they wanted me to do that spam texting of
No, yeah.
like, no, like that instantly, like, no. The calling, great. Like if you're calling or people are calling to actually talk to people, I'm fine with that, right? Because there's potential for a real conversation. Spam texting, I don't care what numbers you tell me, it just doesn't
Yeah.
work. Like
Please indicate your willingness to
Yeah.
with this candidate. Yeah.
You're better to spend money, and especially again, looking at my district in my area, you're better to spend money on direct mail advertisements or yard signs or events or those type of things than you are. I know the people that lived in the area and spamming them with text messages. Not the way to get a good vibe of your campaign, because especially if that's the only thing they ever see on your campaign and it instantly makes them feel an emotion that is not a good emotion,
Yeah.
you've kind of blew it from the get-go.
What else did you get? Recommendation wise, that didn't make sense.
Gosh, I'm trying to think back now.
Is I think most people. Well, I don't want to speak for most people. I know when I think about like running a campaign, like it's intimidating to think of the whole process and not understanding it, and laws and fundraising, and public speaking, and all the issues you got to know. Um, but like, I also wonder how much of the campaign is driven by the actual candidate, and how much of it is driven kind of like by a team of people that's kind of like making all the decisions.
And that's where mine was unique into like it being at the state level. Like I didn't have to talk about federal issues, and there was no reason for us to waste time on conversations of federal issues when there were so many state issues that could be addressed that I felt the need to talk about. But I did the whole campaign by myself. I didn't have a team. I had some support here and there, and I had a coach who helped coach me on specifically like the fundraising, because that's what like I was horrible at asking people for money. Because why would I ask people for money if I didn't know exactly what I was going to spend it on, just to then get the money to spend it? To me, that was just that's very backwards. And it being state level, it did have a lot more freedom than a federal race is like completely different than state level. So I do think like I would never even sort of consider federal. Like if it had been a federal, it would have been an instant like, no, not for me, thank you. But Indiana and the district I lived in, there were so many issues that was like we could really address these, and not like we don't need like tens of thousands. We don't need all this money to address a lot of these issues. We need like cultural changes or smaller changes to support to help drive conversations. And so for me, I completely controlled my campaign. There was nothing that like I ran all of my own social medias. I created all the graphics. I created all the marketing completely and utterly myself, which I know is not the normal for most campaigns by any means.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's probably refreshing for most people. Yeah.
And it was, and again, it wasn't that I steer cleared of like hard conversations either. It was just that like we need to like focus on like what is your life and the state issues, and here's what I'm seeing, and these are the things that like we're seeing done or being done within our current Indiana state legislation that I don't think most of us pay attention to. And so that was a big part of it too, is these local races and these state races matter so much, and what is actually being done and what they vote on. The lip service thing, like it was just like it cool, you can go see exactly everything they voted on. Like I don't care what they say, look at this, it doesn't match.
It's easy to get distracted too by national level stuff, stuff that doesn't really affect your day-to-day life that you feel strongly about. So you kind of focus over there, and you kind of forget about your school district, your taxes, like specifically who you're voting for in your district.
Well, politics is such a local thing too. And like there's things like judges that like technically don't have a party or don't have a whatever, but like, can you remember any time that you've known about like a judge before, like you've put them on? Like, like there's things like that just they matter so much. And so yeah, I think it's a lot of us have to take a step back and not look so much at the party or the thing, but like instead, like what is the actual issue or what is the actual discussion and what's being done, and looking at it from that angle. And so I think that's what the campaign I was hoping to bring, as well as like not being afraid to say, yeah, like I suffer from PTSD, I have anxiety, I have panic attacks, and yet I can still do these things and I can still be thriving in these things. And having these challenges doesn't mean that I can't do a good job. it doesn't mean that like I'm unable to function. It doesn't mean any of these type of things. And so I think that was part of the narrative, or I guess part of my story that I was hoping to get across, because I've met so many veterans and service members and those of us who now are willing to talk about things that, because I think for so long we didn't, there was this perception of what it meant to have PTSD or to have anxiety, like this, like you're just broken. And it's like, I don't really get behind that. Like, I'm all for like, yeah, I think a lot of us need to seek out like physical health, mental health, all of that type of stuff, but it doesn't mean you're broken just because you're trying um, to better yourself or to heal through past traumas or so on and so forth. So I don't have this, I can't get behind the bandwagon of like, we're all broken as service members. It's just like, it's not it.
Maybe you are if you give up, right? So to some extent, it's how you're gonna face all the same shit that everyone else in the world's got to face too, right? Like, I don't think PTSD is exclusive to service members, maybe at a higher rate, but
Not at all.
yeah,
Not at
this
all. And I think that's, yeah.
I remember when I was younger, when I first joined the army, there was like, oh, that guy's got PTSD, and it was like this weird badge of honor, I guess. It was like he's seen some shit, and it was almost like dudes were looking to be like branded as like, I have PTSD. And as I got older, I realized a lot of those guys were using that diagnosis or that term as a way to kind of advocate any responsibility over their lives. Hey, I can't do that because I got PTSD. I'm incapable of pursuing any kind of anything better, right? I can't even fulfill my basic responsibilities at home with my wife, my kids, my job because I got PTSD. It kind of became like a cop out for a lot of folks. And then for other folks that are really struggling with it, became almost like the stigma. It's like, oh, that guy's got PTSD,
And I think that's where like talking about it and people being able to share it and their struggles and like it's like we don't need to be fixed, right? Like I have like holistic health has been like my thing. I get medications work for some people and that's awesome. For me, it doesn't. I have red hair. I carry the red hair gene. Medications don't work the way they should for me. And so like part of like my healing and going through things and like doing cognitive therapy was one where it really opened my eyes, where it was just like retraining your mind how to think, because trauma changes how your mind thinks.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I looked at it that way, it's just like, I'm not broken. My mind just started like doing what it had to survive or to do whatever. And you're able to retrain your brain how to think. Or I've done acupuncture. I have done, probably my favorite is biocraniosacral therapy, which is a combination of spine work, energy work, and a whole lot of other things. But it's like you have the power, you have the authority over your body, you have all of these things. And although it's, you can't control everything, but there's a lot of things you can do. From like, I don't drink any alcohol anymore. I look at everything I put in my body, like there are a lot of things that you can do to be in a better space. Like I had really bad anxiety. Well, stop drinking caffeine. And lo and behold, like I don't have as many panic attacks. I don't have as many of these things, because when you're constantly fighting against all of your body's trying to fight against all of these things, yeah, it makes it harder. So it's, I think, finding the things that work for you as well. But like you said, it's like not expecting other people to fix you. They don't have the ability to.
They don't have the ability to, and it's, yeah. I mean, you're right. Holistically, you got to look at it. There's a million things that are going to work, and it's kind of like in synergy they'll work. A lot of dudes want to like do one thing, and I'm not fixed. No shit, man. Like, you got to do more than that. You can't just go to therapy for like 6 months and expect it to be better.
For sure.
Yeah. So what do you do now?
So now I work for the Department of Agriculture, the Agriculture Marketing Service, which is one of USDA's 29 agencies. We help farmers and producers promote and sell their commodities, and I am a public affairs specialist. as well as the president for the Department of Agriculture's Veteran Employee Organization.
I'm not gonna lie, a lot of that went over my head. So, I guess, yeah, what does the USDA even do really?
So the Department of Agriculture does a ton of stuff. So our agency, like I said, we're one of the 29 agencies, but the Forest Service falls under USDA. The Food and Nutrition Service falls under USDA. Our agency specifically, like USDA Prime Meat, that symbol, or the organic seal, that all falls under our agency. We are 80% stakeholder funded. We do programs like remote beef carcass grading, beef grading in general, egg grading, cotton grading, cotton classing, cheese grading. What else? We do a lot. Grants as well. There's a multitude of things, but I run AMS's social media and oversee the cotton and tobacco program from a public affairs aspect.
Okay. Do you interface with the farmers and a lot?
I do. Yeah, I've had a lot of pleasure in being able to spotlight, especially our grantees, to tell their stories on social media. And then through the Veteran Employee Organization, which is the department's level employee resource group, I've had the pleasure of getting to interact with different farmers out in the community who are also veterans, which has been a great experience.
I think maybe a dark transition, but I think I was reading something the other day that said farmers struggle with suicide at a rate that's higher or comparable to veterans, just given that they're under so much stress all the time, and I guess their margins are so razor thin that it's a pretty unpredictable life.
Yeah, and that stat has been kind of the same for like a really long time. And I think I've heard this a lot in our veteran employee organization, that there are a lot of times that even farmers who have never been in service are more willing to interact with the veterans within our organization, because there's some communication, understanding, just a way of conversing that like really works well together. We don't, deal directly with that within our agency, but this year for our Veterans Day observance, the Veteran Employee Organization hosted our first Veterans Day observance. Normally the department, does theirs at their level. But we ended up doing one, and we got a veteran farmer who was Special Forces Army, who's now a cattle farmer, and he came to talk. And what he does is he hosts, I don't know, not clinics. Come to the farm days where they talk about mental health. Yeah, I can't think of like the name, but he hosts those at his farm, and he's a huge advocate in the mental health space and specifically in the cattle farming and the ag community. And he talks about that a lot, and talks about the mental health struggles and how farming really, as a veteran, like saved his life. But it's also something in the community that is not as widespoken and talked about. So I know that there are people within that community who are really, really talking about that. And I think we see that trend more and more in every industry, where we're talking more about mental health and what it really, really means. And I think the more we get to this like holistic health, and like, in the Marine Corps, we called it the whole Marine concept. When we get to that spot in our health, I think we'll all be better of like, it's dental, it's mental, it's physical. Like, it's not just like, it's spiritual, right? It's not just one thing that makes us healthy or makes us thriving in our lives. It's like bringing all of these things together.
Yeah, bringing spiritual health to the table is an important one. I know a lot of dudes that are on active duty a lot of times struggle with like the post GWAT service. That's kind of just, it's a garrison lifestyle. There's no unifying effort to go fight bad guys somewhere else. Everyone's kind of just lost in the sauce, like going from meeting to meeting, motor pool to motor pool. I don't think it's like measured, right? Like people probably don't like look at that as a metric in your health, but like being purposeless, or feeling purposeless at least, certainly drives people's mental health into a deficit. And as you transition out, right after however many years of service, you for 8, like, and you're looking around for something to not just pay the bills, not just pass the time. You want something that's purposeful. I could see how working on a farm would fill that void, right? Fill that gap. I think a lot of
For
times
sure.
in the military, you're kind of focused on like I don't know, playing the game, right? Playing the sport. I don't know if you had to do that too much, but like I know in my career, it's like, hey, to get the next promotion, to go to your next job, to be successful, to be measured as successful, you got to play X, Y, Z in this order. And none of it makes sense to me, like because it just takes me further and further away from like doing what I signed up to do, which is for me be a combat medic, working on patients, training people on working on patients. And okay, but the army says, hey, you got to go sit on the computer for 9 hours a day. Great, that's going to be success, and that's how we measure it. I think once I realized like that can't be my job, I was going to lose my mind. I have to start looking in other places for things to spend my time on, spend my energy on, and that might be in some way my spiritual health, right?
It does. And look at this, the younger generations coming in and even like the GWAT veterans and having more access to information than we did before, where it's not black and white. We live in a world of gray. And it's not as easy to just say, we're hunting down this enemy or we're doing this or we're doing this things, right? Because as more information comes out, things that we thought were a certain way, there's gray to it now. Or I can see sides that we couldn't see before. Or just this, again, this access to information. Like this generation has never lived a life without smartphones, this upcoming generation, without this instant access to information. And whether it's right information or wrong information, like that's then a whole nother topic of conversation. But when you're looking at, there's some really positive things about this generation. Like they're not scared to be like, this isn't serving me. I'm not going to do this, right? Like, what is the purpose? And so I think it's an extra challenge than when we're looking at the military now of, are we, are like you're saying, are we providing like this thing? And I had an XO who used to say this all the time when we do combat fitness challenges with different sports teams. And be like, he would say shared suffering creates the strongest bonds. And it's like, yeah, as messed up as it is, it does, right? But there has to be another way to also create those bonds. And so it's looking at, I think part of it is not evolving fast enough with how the rest of the world is evolving, because for so long, the military could kind of it is its own culture. And that's, there's things about it that can stay that way, but there's also things that have to evolve. And I think that's part of when we're looking in the transition that gets so overlooked is that spiritual well-being. And that's not like religious based. It's not like just this one thing. It's like how chaplains are spiritual leaders, right? And they have to study all of the like so many religions and they have to know how to spiritually guide anybody. They can only preach in their religion, yes, but they have to spiritually be able to guide anyone. And I think that with having no equal to that, even sort of in the civilian sector, that like lack of transition. And even when you look at a lot of the veteran service organizations, and I have been in a number of them. I've been in the Marine Corps League for years now. But when you look at the chaplains, oftentimes in those service organizations, they're not spiritual leaders. They're in a very specific religion and oftentimes turn people away because they forget that a role of a chaplain or of that entity is to be a spiritual guide or to help people no matter what their beliefs are. You're not trying to change their beliefs. You're trying to guide them based on what their beliefs already are. And so I think that is a big piece that's just like, it's just not really there in the veteran community the way it is. Like, I would love to see more of that. And how do we spiritually kind of find our places outside and during that transition?
Interesting. I'll have to look at some people. I have some people that come to mind that maybe would be willing to come on the podcast and share their ideas on that. If someone wanted to reach out to you, how would they do it?
The best way is LinkedIn, tap Bartley, or you can follow the hashtag Blunt Bartley. You can also listen to me or find me on the Oath We Took podcast. We're on all streaming platforms and social medias out there, minus Twitter. It's too much for me. I can't tweet.
All right.
But LinkedIn is the best place.
Okay. Tab, it's been great talking to you.
Thank you. You as well.